Why do liars become leaders? Why do the cruel rise while the kind are crushed? Why does the loudest voice win, not the wisest? It's a quiet frustration many carry, a painful dissonance between what we're told growing up and what we see in the real world. We're taught that goodness is rewarded, that honesty and kindness lead to success. But reality often tells another story. We watch as manipulators are promoted, narcissists celebrated, and those with the sharpest elbows climb the fastest. The gentle thinkers and kind souls, meanwhile, are often pushed to the margins, overlooked, underestimated, forgotten. This harsh truth isn't new. Friedrich Nietzsche, the provocative German philosopher, tackled this very contradiction head-on. His answer isn't comforting, but it's profoundly revealing. Nietzsche believed that much of our modern morality is based on illusion, on a system designed not to reflect truth, but to control. He proposed that there are two fundamental types of morality: master morality and slave morality. Master morality, according to Nietzsche, arises from those who are strong, physically, mentally, or socially. These individuals value strength, power, pride, and ambition. They define good as whatever expresses their vitality and independence. Slave morality, on the other hand, arises from the weak, those oppressed or lacking power. It values humility, obedience, pity, and self-denial, defining good not as power, but as safety and gentleness. This framework changes everything. In Nietzsche's view, society has largely adopted slave morality, preaching kindness and humility not necessarily because they are inherently noble, but because they suppress rebellion, dominance, and the will to rise above. This is why when someone expresses raw ambition, takes control unapologetically, or refuses to shrink themselves, society often calls them arrogant or cruel, even if they're simply refusing to play small. Nietzsche saw morality not as universal truth, but as a human invention, often used by the powerless to label the powerful as evil. At the center of Nietzsche's philosophy is the concept of the will to power, the primal force within all living beings, not just to survive, but to thrive, to assert, to expand their influence. According to him, every action, every ambition, every choice stems from this deep-rooted will, not to conform, but to become more. The so-called worst people, the bold, the arrogant, the unkind, may simply be the ones most in touch with this drive. They don't hide their hunger for power. They don't dilute their ambition. They bend reality, influence people, and shape systems to fit their vision. In a world that rewards boldness and control, they thrive, not despite their traits, but because of them. But the world doesn't always reward open aggression. Often those who succeed wear masks. They learn to cloak dominance in charm, to disguise manipulation as charisma. We rarely crown the blatantly evil. Instead, we reward those who master performance. And because society values appearances, these individuals rise, not because they are moral, but because they understand the game. So why do the worst people seem to succeed? Because the world isn't built on fairness. It's built on power. Not always in its brutal form, but in influence, perception, and fearlessness. Nietzsche's unsettling truth is this: those who embrace their power, who stop asking for permission to exist, are often the ones who win. Not because they're bad, but because they've stopped pretending to be good. We grow up believing a beautiful lie, that if we're good, life will reward us. That if we follow the rules, work hard, stay humble, and treat others well, success will follow like a loyal shadow. But then the world cracks open, and what we see doesn't match what we were told. The kind are overlooked, the honest are silenced. The sensitive carry invisible burdens while the cunning rise without shame. You watch people manipulate, cheat, and dominate, and not only get away with it, but thrive because of it. It's a painful realization, one that feels unfair, unjust, and even immoral. But to Nietzsche, this wasn't some flaw in the system. It was the system. He believed that morality, the very thing we're told defines right and wrong, is not an absolute truth handed down from the heavens. It's a human invention, a construct shaped by power dynamics, societal needs, and evolutionary survival. In Nietzsche's view, morality wasn't born from purity. It was born from necessity, from weakness trying to protect itself from strength, from the powerless creating values that favored humility, sacrifice, and obedience, because they had no other way to win. It became a clever form of psychological warfare. If you can't defeat your enemy physically, convince them that power is evil and submission is noble. That's the ugly truth Nietzsche uncovered, that our entire understanding of good and evil might just be a game of perception, played to keep the strong in chains and the weak in control. Nietzsche believed that not all morality was created equal. In fact, he claimed that there were two distinct types of morality, and they came from radically different kinds of people. The first, what he called master morality, comes from the strong, the independent, the creators. These are people who do not inherit their values, they invent them. For them, strength is not something to hide, it's something to celebrate. Power, ambition, excellence, and pride are all viewed as virtues. They do not look to others for validation or permission. They live by their own internal compass, shaped by confidence, action, and self-overcoming. They do not ask, "Is this good for others?" They ask, "Is this good for me?" In contrast, slave morality emerges from the powerless, those who have been conquered, controlled, or suppressed. Instead of creating values, they react to power by demonizing it. In their moral system, humility is good, suffering is sacred, obedience is holy, and pride is a sin. But Nietzsche didn't see this as moral truth. He saw it as strategic resentment. Since the weak could not overthrow the strong by force, they created a new moral code that made weakness a virtue. If you can't beat the powerful, you shame them. You turn their pride into arrogance, their dominance into evil, their joy into selfishness. It's not a celebration of truth, it's a defense mechanism. Nietzsche argued that modern society is ruled by this slave morality. We say we admire kindness, modesty, and humility, but deep down, who do we really follow? The confident, the bold, the powerful, the ones who speak without fear and act without apology. The reason the worst people seem to succeed is not because they're evil, but because they've rejected the morality designed to tame them. They've chosen the path of power over approval. They've tapped into the raw, unapologetic force Nietzsche called the will to power. And in doing so, they play a game the rest of the world is too afraid to admit even exists. At the very heart of Nietzsche's philosophy lies a single burning concept: the will to power. For Nietzsche, this wasn't just a psychological trait or a desire for control. It was the core engine of life itself. Everything that lives, not just humans, but animals, even nature, is driven not primarily by the need to survive or the pursuit of happiness, but by a deeper, more primal instinct: the need to expand, to assert, to express strength and become more than what it is. Survival is passive, power is active. And while many philosophies try to elevate comfort, compassion, or morality as the highest virtues, Nietzsche saw these as secondary, even distracting, compared to the raw force of the will that compels a person to rise, to overcome, to shape the world in their own image. This is the key to understanding why the so-called worst people, the ruthless, the arrogant, the bold, often rise to the top. They are not bound by the moral chains of guilt, conformity, or external approval. Instead, they move through the world like forces of nature, driven by an inner fire that refuses to bow. They act while others hesitate. They speak while others stay silent. And while society loves to pretend it rewards fairness, humility, and compassion, deep down, it fears and often follows those who dare to take what they want. These people are not held back by the need to be liked. They are propelled by the need to assert their existence. The uncomfortable truth is that this unapologetic obedience to the will to power gives them an edge. It makes them unstoppable in a world that values clarity, decisiveness, and boldness, even if it won't admit it out loud. And so, the cruel rise. The liars lead. The loudest voices win, not because the world is broken, but because they've tapped into something real, something ancient, something most people are too afraid to embrace: the pure, unapologetic power of becoming. Nature is the most brutal and honest teacher we have. It doesn't deal in fairness, compassion, or moral righteousness. It operates on one principle: power survives. The lion isn't evil for taking the life of a gazelle. The storm isn't immoral for wiping out a village. Nature does not apologize, justify, or negotiate. It simply is. And this is the mirror Nietzsche holds up to society. While humans pride themselves on being moral creatures, inventing systems of ethics, religion, and justice, beneath those layers still pulses the same raw law of the wild. Might determines outcome. Nietzsche believed that our moral systems are often disguises, clever stories we tell to make our instincts feel acceptable. But deep down, the same natural instincts guide us. The drive to win, to dominate, to protect what's ours, to conquer in some way, whether it's business, status, ideas, or influence. That's why the people who rise to the top are not always the most ethical. They're often the ones who best understand the terrain and play it without flinching. They move through the world like predators in a jungle, not because they're evil, but because they've shed the illusion that the world is fair. This doesn't mean kindness is meaningless, but it does mean that in a world built more like a battlefield than a temple, kindness alone isn't enough. Power, whether through force, influence, intelligence, or charisma, determines who shapes reality. And Nietzsche challenges us to look that truth in the face, not with despair, but with clarity. Because only when we stop pretending the world plays by gentle rules can we begin to move through it with awareness, purpose, and strength. In our modern, supposedly evolved world, the game of power isn't always about physical strength or domination. It's far subtler. Today, power wears a mask, a polished, well-mannered smile. Those who rise to the top often know how to play the part, how to charm, how to appear virtuous. On the surface, they fit perfectly into the social expectations of kindness, civility, and decorum. But underneath that polished exterior, they are still playing the same game, the game of power. They might not be as loud or obvious as the tyrants of history, but they wield power in a quieter, more insidious way. Nietzsche would argue that this isn't necessarily evil or malicious. It's a natural part of human evolution. The ability to disguise one's true intentions, to blend into the system while quietly moving toward personal goals, is a form of survival and success. After all, the modern world demands that we navigate a web of contradictions. We're expected to play by the rules of politeness and moral virtue, while also thriving in a competitive, often cutthroat environment. Those who can pull this off without blinking, who can move seamlessly between social masks, are the ones who emerge victorious. It's easy to believe that power today should be straightforward, that it should be earned through hard work and morality. But Nietzsche would challenge us to see that power in the modern world often takes more subtle, sophisticated forms. The ones who thrive are those who can read between the lines, understand the power structures beneath the polite facade, and manipulate them to their advantage. To succeed, you don't have to be evil. You just have to know how to navigate the game. And in that, there's a certain brutal honesty. In a world full of contradictions, the most successful are often the ones who can embrace them without hesitation. So, are we doomed? Are decency, kindness, and depth destined to be crushed under the weight of a society that rewards the worst behaviors? The answer is more complex than a simple yes or no. Nietzsche didn't advocate for us to follow in the footsteps of the worst people, the bullies, the manipulative, or the power-hungry. His philosophy wasn't about turning us into those who thrive by exploiting others. Instead, he wanted us to see the world clearly, to stop being naive about how power operates, to stop waiting for a system that rewards moral goodness as a form of justice. According to Nietzsche, waiting for the world to give you what you deserve, based on your inherent goodness, kindness, or depth, is a dangerous, fruitless game. Life doesn't operate by that idealistic script. What Nietzsche really wanted, however, was for us to cultivate our own strength, to embrace our inner ambition and stop apologizing for our voice, for our desires, and for our existence. The world isn't fair, and it doesn't always reward the good. But that doesn't mean that we should abandon the pursuit of greatness or diminish ourselves to fit in. Instead, Nietzsche called for the creation of the Übermensch, the overman or Superman. This was the ideal human being, someone who writes their own values, defines their own truth, and lives by their own code, regardless of societal pressures. The Übermensch isn't about trying to copy the worst aspects of human nature, nor is it about embracing a blind form of power for power's sake. It's about outgrowing the need to be liked, outgrowing the limits placed by society's false moralities, and stepping into your own fullest potential. It's about finding your own truth, independent of external validation, and living that truth unapologetically. So no, we're not doomed, but we need to shed the naive hope that decency alone will carry us forward. We must recognize the role power plays in human nature and understand that, to truly thrive, we need to embrace our own inner strength. By doing so, we can become the kind of people who no longer seek approval from the world, but instead create a world that reflects our own values. The worst people seem to succeed because they understand the game. They understand the rules of power, the mechanisms that drive society, and how to manipulate those systems for their own benefit. But that doesn't mean you have to follow their path. You don't have to become like them. You don't have to play dirty or abandon your integrity. Instead, what you need to do is stop expecting fairness from a world that was never designed to be fair. Society is not a level playing field, and it never has been. Waiting for justice, for kindness, or for recognition based on your virtues will only leave you frustrated and powerless. The key to navigating this world is to grow your mind and sharpen your will. Cultivate strength, mental resilience, and strategic thinking. Don't wait to be chosen by others. Don't sit back and hope that someone will notice your goodness and reward you for it. Choose yourself. Define your own path. Your success doesn't need to come from external validation. It comes from your internal power, your own vision, and your willingness to act. In Nietzsche's world, it's not the morally pure or the passive who rise. It's those who can see the world as it is, without illusions, and who are willing to act boldly despite the obstacles. The ones who are not afraid to carve their own way, who understand that life is a game of power and will, and who are willing to master it. So don't wait for a world that rewards you for your goodness. Build the strength to choose yourself. In the end, it's those who rise above societal expectations and forge their own destiny who truly succeed.